Hello and welcome to Beyond Boundaries. I'm your host, Justin Douglas. Welcome to 2021 Beyond Boundaries. Haven't been podcasting in a while, had a lot going on during the end of the year of 2020. I'm so thankful that you all stuck around and are listening still. I have a great guest today that I am really looking forward to introducing you to. Reed Berkowitz is a game designer, and we talk about QAnon and its connection to game theory. It's an amazing interview. He is so knowledgeable and reveals some of what is happening in the Q world from his particular expertise. I encourage you to share this episode, rate the podcast, subscribe wherever you listen. My hope is that I can do a podcast or two a month in 2021 and interview amazing people along the way. Part of what makes that all possible is when you give to Patreon. It helps cover the fees that make this available on platforms like Spotify, iTunes, Podbean, or wherever you're listening. So any amount is appreciated and means a ton to me. The Patreon link is in the description. I want to especially thank all those who gave to Patreon in 2020. You made the Beyond Boundaries podcast possible last year, and for that, I am incredibly thankful. Here is my interview with Reed Berkowitz. Well, I'm here with Reed Berkowitz. He is a game designer at the Curiouser Institute. Reed, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm good. Hey, I wanted to talk to you because I saw this Medium article that you did, a game designer's analysis of QAnon. And I found the article pretty fascinating from a number of perspectives and wanted to talk to you about it. On a previous episode, the 27th episode of Beyond Boundaries, we talked about conspiracy theories. And my friend Ryan and a doctor friend of mine, Dr. Nathan McConkey, we all talked about some different conspiracy theories that we've over time believed or bought into. But then Dr. Nate McConkey talked about how some of those conspiracies currently are actually working against the medical community amid COVID in so many ways, and some of the struggle that he's seeing even in patients that are coming to him with theories about doctors signing death certificates with COVID when it wasn't COVID, things, all kinds of other things that he had heard as conspiracy theories, and how that lack of truth was causing so much difficulty in the medical community. And we talked about the psychology of conspiracy theories. So if you want to go back and check out that episode, if you're listening, that's episode 27. But today I want to talk about conspiracy theories and focus a little more on QAnon, because it's kind of its own phenomenon. So when did you learn about QAnon, and what did you learn when you learned that? Like, I'm curious.
Actually, my wife clued me into QAnon. She's always on the Twitter sphere, and it was pretty early on. It wasn't that long after it started. I want to say it was 2017.
Okay. And just for those who are gamers out there, you're a game designer. What kind of games have you designed, or what style of game, or what, maybe even if you want to name some games that you've worked on? Just curious.
I've done a few different styles of gaming. I've done, educational games. I've done what's called serious games, which are games, they're supposed to teach you something. Some teach kids. I work with Snoopy and Felix the cat, and things like that. But my real passion are games that merge fiction and reality. So we call them experience fictions. They would include live action role-playing games, immersive theater, and alternate reality games.
Can you give me an example of like a popular alternate reality game that people might know or be aware of?
I think probably the one that kind of kickstarted everything off was the game for the AI movie, the Spielberg movie, and it was called The Beast internally and by the fans, and that was probably one of the biggest games ever. And that team went on to produce a lot of really great alternate reality games.
Okay. Where does like World of Warcraft fall on like what would that be? Would that be like a considered a live action role playing game, I guess? Or I don't know what that would be called.
No, that would be a massively multiplayer online role playing game.
Okay.
So an
Okay.
MMORG. And the reason is because it takes place only in your computer, right? You have to
Okay.
be on your screen to play it, and you are playing it with lots of other people. But these other types of games move off of the screen into real events.
Oh, okay.
Phone calls, packages arrive at your door.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, you actually live the adventure. There's stories that the medium is reality, and so you're not reading it, you're not listening to it, you're experiencing it. That's why I call it experience fiction, because you are actually running around solving puzzles and doing clues and hopefully having a good time.
And behind all that, there's a game maker or multiple game makers who are kind of controlling that. Like, who's sending the package to my house? Is that
Yes, well,
okay?
that's part of the mystery, especially in the alternate reality game genre. They would be considered puppet masters.
Okay,
And
Puppet
so
Master.
you you see something unusual, something in a billboard, a credit in a movie that doesn't make sense to you, and you're like, "What does that mean?" And you Google it, and suddenly that's the rabbit hole. That's where you fall down the
Wow.
rabbit hole. For instance, in the ARG Isle of Bees, they sent little things of honey to people with little jars of honey, and inside were clues. And if you pieced all the little clues together, it would say "I love bees," and then you would go to a website, and that was the game for the Halo launch.
Oh,
And
wow.
so you would go to the site, and then the site you'd be like ilovebees.com. There is a site, and it looks like a normal beekeeping site or something like that, but then you realize it's been hacked and there's all this information. If you go into the source code, you start seeing things, and then that leads you into the real world. So from there you get these coordinates, and you're like, oh, you realize they're coordinates and you don't know what they're for, so you go there, and suddenly there's a time and a coordinate, and you get there and there's a payphone, and the payphone rings, and there's somebody talking
What?
to you, and it's a robot from the future. Okay, and you're having a conversation now, and you're looking around like, is this real, and it starts to blur the lines, and you have events and so on, and they can get quite elaborate.
Wow. That's pretty amazing. It's almost like National Treasure
Yeah,
times 100, right? Like
yeah,
it's like this like little clue here, or like Da Vinci Code. Like there's this clue here, and if we can just solve it, if we have the right, like, is that kind of it feels like it's something like that, like a big puzzle to solve, like a mystery to solve.
exactly. It's a huge mystery. It's usually got a very good story attached to it, hopefully, and it involves thousands and thousands of people. So you may start alone, you may find the rabbit hole on your own, but then you start Googling and you look around and you find that there's a huge community of people all trying to solve these puzzles and
Mm,
coordinate everything at the same time. And then the
mm.
puppet masters release clues every so often on a schedule or randomly, whatever their game is, and everybody gets together, tries to solve the puzzles, and then hopefully it leads to more story, unlocking more games, etc.
That's awesome. I remember so I was a youth pastor, and one of my students uh was on World of Warcraft. So WoW at the time. And this was big. This was like,
Yeah,
I don't know, 10, 15 years ago. It was huge at the time. And he invited me on, and I was like, nah, I'm all right. I'm all right. And then eventually I was like, okay, I'll try it out. You know what I mean? And I just remember how immersive it was and how addicting it was. It
yeah,
got to the point to where one Saturday I rolled out of bed at like 8 o'clock, and I sat down and started playing. And you're just like constantly chasing like a new level or a new thing, or trying to get armor or whatever, or raiding with people to get points, or I can't even remember now, but or a certain sword or whatever. And like I looked up and it was 4 p.m. and I hadn't eaten. And that's when I said, I'm done with this. I was like, I'm totally done with this. But it is interesting when I think about that moment in my life of like being able to sit down and play a game for 8 hours without like consciously even like coming out of the game into reality,
yeah.
and caring for myself, or my Saturday schedule of what I needed to accomplish that day, you know what I mean? Or any of the number of ways that I needed to care for myself or the people around me. And I realized quickly, I was mature enough, I think, as like, a 23-year-old to realize like, okay, this isn't going to work. Like I'm not, and these were kids that were like in levels. I don't know. At that time, I think like 70 was the cap or something. And I was like a 5 or something, just trying to, I was
Yeah,
like, I've got so
level.
long to go to get to level 70 and there's no way I'm going to have this amount of time. But I think part of what's interesting about the game theory when you apply it to QAnon, and we'll talk more specifically about QAnon in a moment, but like these like alternate reality games are probably pretty addictive, like immersive, right? Like this is the way people are identifying themselves, even as they're playing these games sometimes, right? Like maybe even sometimes in an unhealthy way.
I mean, I think in all games, like some of the reasons why World of Warcraft can be so, uh, immersive and addicting, is that you're reflecting your inner life. I mean, games and fiction point inwards, right? They're about
Mm,
us on some level. So it feels like you're neglecting your life, but actually you're taking care of a different part of your life. You know, you're it's about ego maintenance and development, right? People say it's entertainment, but I think it's much more serious than that, and I think a lot of people get a lot of benefit out of it. But yes, it can be very immersive. Now, alternate reality games are meant to be literally as immersive as possible. They call
okay.
your phone, they come to your house, they bring you to places, and at the same time they're games, so you know that they are not real. You know that a robot from the future is not calling you on a payphone. You know
Mm,
it's a game that's designed to entertain you, calling you on a payphone, right?
yeah.
QAnon, however, works exactly the same way. It uses exactly the same tools. It has rabbit holes that bring you to an online community, that has puzzles that you're solving, and then it brings you to real world events exactly in the same way as an alternate reality game, but it's telling you that it's not a game.
Mm,
It's telling you that
I
what
see.
is happening within it is real, right? So when you arrive at the Capitol, there's a weird mix because part of it feels like fiction because it is fiction. So a lot of the QAnon people were literally dressed up in QAnon outfits,
Mm,
almost as if it was a plot point, something they wanted to be a part of in the game, right?
mm,
But it's telling you that it's real. There is going to be a revolution. There is going to be, you know, uh, something that's going to happen here. So I don't consider QAnon to be a game, but it's using almost exactly the techniques of an alternate reality game
mm.
to
That's
do
so.
that. Because when people were first developing alternate reality games, there had to be a kind of moral code that developed because you could get people to do things.
Yeah.
Really, really weird things. I mean, in the game that I mentioned where you picked up the bay phones and talked to people, there were people in a hurricane waiting for the phone to ring, and they had to say, hey, don't do that. It's like, hang up, it's not that important, right?
Yeah. They're
But people
standing
are looking
outside in
for
a
adventure.
hurricane.
They want
Yeah.
that risk. People will go where the game says to go, and they won't maybe think of the consequences or the safety to themselves or others because they get so caught up.
Yeah.
Maybe it's because they trust the game makers, right? Or maybe it's because they don't really care,
Mm.
you know. So, yeah.
Talk more about the ego when you said you think games are beyond just entertainment. Because I remember back, I have like a video of me at 8 years old jumping up and down when I got a Nintendo with Tecmo Super Bowl, which was like the dream of 8-year-old Justin, jumping up and down
That's
with
great.
that. And at the time I saw it all as entertainment, but I could see it totally as ego because the amount of trash talking that went on during that game about how great I was at Tecmo Super Bowl, it was certainly attached to my ego. So talk a little more about the ego development slash the needs we have in that area and
Yeah,
how
and I
you
don't
see
mean ego
gaming
in the sense of like
always
just
negative.
self propaganda. As sometimes it's thought of. I mean, who you are as a person, right? You know, I had come from it from a very fiction centric point of view. That's what I do. I research fiction and games. So pardon my, bias here, but I feel like the ego, what's talking to you and what's listening to me is is in some ways a fictional construct, something that we
Mm.
created, and was created for us. So when your parents look at you and say, who's a good boy, right? You're a good boy, or dog, whatever.
Yeah.
It works. And, and at that moment, you're like, I'm a boy and I'm good. Okay, what does that mean? And you look at yourself in a mirror at some point, Lacan's mirror stage, and you say, oh, that must be that good boy that mom's always talking about. And then your mother's telling you what is good, what's good, what's bad. And we're trying to inoculate our kids with humanity, whatever that means to them, and make them care about something that is symbolic instead of something that's physical, so that when you're 2 years old and you see some kid with a cookie, you don't just grab it because you
Yeah.
want it. That's your physical biological urge, is to dominate that kid and take the cookie if you're bigger, right? And we don't want that. We don't, we have a very symbolic structure. You got to know things. You have to know, what's green and what's red, or you could die crossing the
Mm.
road. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
This
Yeah.
world is symbolic, right? So we have to create an internal world for ourselves that is strong enough to override our actual biology, even.
Mm.
We have to have love, we have to have honor. We have to be willing to go to war, we have to be willing to pay taxes, we have to know the difference between curly quotes and straight quotes if you're programming, right?
Yeah.
This is all super important. It's life and death stuff in some ways. So games, right, are once we get the stories from our parents and the people around us about what they think about us, we begin to take that over, and we can read our own stories. And
Mm.
maybe we're not brave, right? Maybe we're afraid of the dark, but we read Batman. And Batman's not afraid of the dark, right? And we have this weird ability as humans to pretend we're Batman, right? So much so that we can change our own personalities, right? And suddenly you're looking at that dark room and the light switch is on the other side, and you're like, Batman lives in the darkness. You know what I mean? Like, he's not
Yeah.
afraid of the darkness. He loves the darkness. Like, I love the darkness. I'm going over there, and you switch the light on. Now, you don't believe that you're a crime fighter living in Gotham, but you somehow took something from that fiction and used it
Mm.
to become a core part of your personality. And now you are not afraid of the dark. You did
Mm.
it. You got over that boundary. And whenever you do get afraid of the dark, you remember, hey, you know, you don't have to be, right?
Mm.
So you can develop your own ego when you know when you're a kid, especially. I mean, I think that's why so much fiction and some games are based, in childhood and adolescence, because you're forming yourself. There's very few uh you know really hot fiction titles. you know it says, but more and more there are, because I think more and more the world is becoming more symbolic, and so our inner worlds are always in conflict. We're getting constant, advertising and
Yeah.
propaganda on one side is telling us, no, you got to act like this and think like this, and then we have to kind of combat it with the stories that we like that tell us who we are. So
Yeah.
anyway, I think it's important. I think it's complicated, but I think also you can see that you can go very quickly internally, and find pleasure there, simply, and not apply it back out to the real world. Just
Mm.
feel it internally, right? So if
Mm.
you're playing World of Warcraft, for instance, two scenarios might be, um, you know, you decide, well, I'm anonymous and this isn't real, so I'm going to try just being really outgoing, right? I'm going to be brave. I'm going to hang out with guilds. I'm going to, I want to be strong. I want to be brave. I want to work for things that I want and not worry about failing, because it's just a game, right? But you do that, and it's a real accomplishment. You've played the game, you know that it's hard, right? It's meant to be hard, and that other people see you and can respect you and judge you. And so it is a real accomplishment. And you try it out and you're like, well, I could bring that into my real life. You know what I mean? I could go to school and I could be more, there's a girl I like, there's a, boy I like, yeah, I might just say hi. Why not? It works in the game. People are friendly to me. Why wouldn't it work here? And it can
Mm.
change your personality for the better. You can try things out that maybe you weren't getting in the real life. Maybe you're not getting enough, chances to be brave, or whatever. And you can go in this game and you can be brave and you can experience failure, but also the benefits of it and say, yes, I'm going to apply more of that to my real life. I'm going to stand up to this person, or I'm going to say no. Now the bad side is that you can, you know, have negative experiences in your real life, and then go into the game and find that there's a lot of positive reinforcement, but then not apply it and continue to keep getting it from the game, right? And that
Mm,
drives you into the game. And the more you play the game, the more you disregard the things that will actually help your real life. Like
mm,
your schedule goes to hell,
yeah.
and you get more and more of your your sense of self from the game. And it can happen in any form of fiction. If you like romance novels, right?
Yep.
Let's say I want to find love, but I'm reading a lot of romance novels, and I'm sitting in bed eating potato chips, and just letting myself go. you know
Yeah.
I'm not gonna. It's a double-edged thing. If I said, oh, I need love in my life, and this makes me feel that love is possible, and I can go out and be more, uh and risk more to find the people that I want to be with, great. If I says, oh, I need love in my life, and I can get it from these books, then I might be in trouble.
No,
That was a long answer. I'm
that's a
sorry.
really good answer. No, that's the whole time. Like when you first started talking about fiction, I was thinking my wife and I just recently watched Hunger Games again.
Oh yeah.
And I was thinking about, wow, that's so true of this story. Like you watch this character who sacrifices herself for her sister. So she has honor, she has courage, she has integrity. She's willing to fight for what she believes in. Like you just have all these themes that are ego themes in a certain sense, like they're moral compasses, if you will, whatever you want to call them. That as you watch her, it makes you want to be that type of person, or at the very least, it reveals that that type of a character is possible. And um, then if there was a game to reinforce that, does that make sense to actually play that person and to be
Yeah.
that type of person? It could totally then, in essence, it's almost like practice for the real world. Like you're getting
Yeah.
that feeling of like, I can do this. I can be a courageous person. I can be
Yes.
someone who sacrifices for others. I can be someone who stands up for what they believe in. And so like there's like tons of positives and negatives to that, right? Because whoever, like you said, the you didn't call them game makers, you called them what'd you call them? The people who kind of direct the games,
In
or
Q. Oh,
no,
Puppet Masters.
puppet masters. Yeah. So whoever those puppet masters are, though, they have a pretty big responsibility because they
Yes.
can steer people certain directions. So with Q, whoever the puppet masters are clearly, or whether or not there even are puppet masters becomes like, or what exactly that looks like, how many puppet masters are they working together, all of that. But
Yeah.
before we get into that, I've had a long time of just not even understanding what QAnon is. Like and here's what I mean. It at first it was just, those are just some conspiracy theory people. And there's a lot of conspiracy theory people out there, but there's actually like QAnon drops where they drop stuff, and then it's like you have um almost like, and I guess this, to me this wouldn't be a one for one, but almost like Edward Snowden dropping stuff, but this is like not clearly like government documents, but just like dropping almost like a poetic phrase that you have to then go in and try to pick out the pieces of what it means. And then one QAnon person picks out some pieces of what it means and posts it on their Twitter or wherever, and then a bunch of other people follow that, and then they decipher it more, and it's like this code from, we'll just say in this particular case, like a poem or something that they've now determined must mean this. um if you had to like explain to someone what QAnon is, what would you, where would you start if someone was like, I have no idea what QAnon is? What does this have to do with game? Well, I mean, maybe the next question would be, and then what it is, and then what it has to do with gaming.
Okay. I would say that you know QAnon is the gamification of propaganda. So
Mm,
QAnon is propaganda. It's pure propaganda and manipulation, and it's using gaming techniques instead of traditional media techniques. So instead of just uh, covering your feed with fake news stories or bots that look like people but aren't, it's using gaming techniques to draw you into a conspiracy theory. or a constellation of conspiracy theories, because there's many, many, many conspiracy
Yeah.
theories all inside the Q universe, right? So it's using the tech, and how does it apply to games? The techniques that it's specifically using are alternate reality gaming techniques, which is why it was so clear to me, because I am one of the few people who produces those. Nobody, they're a niche gaming, circles. So when I saw it, I thought, oh yeah, that's what that is. But I thought everybody else saw it too, because I underestimated how nerdy I am. Really, um, I was like, oh yeah, right. No, people don't play this, and they certainly don't make them. There must be like a couple hundred people in the world who make these games.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, the techniques are exactly that. And the members are encouraged to become, part of the proselytizing process, which is probably unique to Q. So, for instance, the rabbit holes that are usually given by the puppet masters are actually now being spread by QAnon members themselves. So, for instance, if you go to a Save the Children rally, thinking you're helping children, they will also have hashtag, WW1. I don't even remember what it is, but where we go one, we go all, or follow the white rabbit, or something like that. And you'll be like, oh, what does that mean? And boom, you've started your journey. And they say, oh, you should really check it out. Go to this website, and then you go to the website, and so now you've gone down the rabbit hole. You're just curious. You're just looking at these, these strange sayings. They seem to be connected to something you care about, which is saving children, which most people are concerned about.
Yeah.
And then you find someone on TikTok, or you find someone on Instagram, and they're talking about this person named Q, who has this intel, who is, you know, uh, uh, feeding us things. And you start going to the groups, and now you're in a whole group of people, thousands of people, and they're all, waiting for clues. And as you
Mm.
mentioned before, Q drops these, he calls them drops. He drops these little packages of text, on these very, very, strange forums. And and they're always in the form of questions, questions that lead you to a particular conclusion. So they're puzzles, and they're kind of like game prompts, almost like writing prompts. So for instance, some of the ones I covered in my article are the ones where he talks about, um, people wearing particular kinds of jewelry,
Mm-hmm.
yak heads, owl necklaces, things like that. He says these are the signs of satanic, things. They have to wear them for their cults. They have to announce to other people, like a Masonic's ring, that they are. So why don't you go out and look at people that you don't like or trust, and see if you can find some examples of people wearing this, right? So now you have a prompt, and you go out into the community, and you're like, oh my God, there are a lot of people. Look at all the people, throwing the hand horns, or, wearing owl jewelry. It's like, and now, of course, Q knows that there are certain groups and people who they have pictures of, that they will post, like the Rothschilds or something like that, at a dress party. But it all gathered together, it looks really weird, and it gives you something to do, and it gives you a community, and you get lots of smiley faces and likes on your posts, when you discover something new, and you pass around, and everybody is pleased with you if you arrive at the correct conclusions. And it's interesting, like, it's interesting, why are so many people dressed up like this? It starts to seem overwhelming when you just look at, you know and Q's like, yeah, that is interesting that everyone is dressed up like a cult. You know what the reason for that is? They're in a cult.
Yeah.
And that makes much more sense than the reality, which is, it's just a cultural thing. It hasn't Someone gave you an owl necklace, right?
Yeah. So you peel back the onion a little bit yourself, but then you're also seeing a bunch of other people peeling back that same onion, getting the same results, or like confirming what you're seeing. Like there's this,
Yes.
what I thought was interesting about reading your Medium article, which by the way, it's in the description. So the link is in the description. Highly encourage you to read this all the way through. It's 20 to 30 minute read, but well worth it. And in there, you kind of talk about this idea that like what's so kind of gripping about the psychology of this particular gaming method, but also how this works for propaganda, is that you feel like you discovered it, even though
Yeah.
you were led to it, even though there were other people that were confirming that bias that had their own biases, right? Like, but you feel like this has to be true because
Has to
you
be.
found it out. And
Yeah.
just do the research and you'll come to the same conclusion. You just haven't done the research. Like,
Right.
is kind of the sense that you get from these uh QAnon conspiracists, right? I mean, is that a fair way of breaking it down?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, the sort of do the research aspect of it is code, right? It doesn't really mean do the research. If you wanted to help, human trafficking, you should uh, get a job at a nonprofit that helps human trafficking. You should
Yeah.
go to college for forensics. You should, you know what I mean,
Yeah.
join become a social worker, right? That's those are people doing the research, right? They are helping. They're on the front lines doing something. What do the research means in a game, you know, is have fun.
Solve the code.
Solve the puzzle,
Yeah.
right? You're not doing real research. You are doing, you're doing, uh, yeah, you're playing a game, right? So,
Yeah.
and somewhere in your mind, right? You can tell the difference, and yet, to be fair, it's super confusing because you have a culture right now, a larger disinformation war that's going on, that's telling you um, that what you're reading in the verified mainstream media that is corroborated by literally everybody else in the world is not real. It's false, right? So you're being told you can't trust them. You have to do the research yourself. Now they know you're not trained to do the research yourself, but they also know that humans are vain. I have fallen into this trap myself. I feel like I can do something that I can't. I'm not trained to do it. I don't have the talent. I don't have the background. I don't have the experience, but I still think my cooking is great because I'm bad at it. Not because I'm good at it, but because I'm bad at it. I feel like this is amazing. I don't know what's so hard about this. Everything's hard about it. That's how bad I am. I don't even know that I'm bad. Right. So yeah, so they go to do their own research, but this thing of distrust is all surrounding, and you're like, like, you don't believe what, the New York Times? You don't believe like the Washington Post? I'm like, no, of course I don't. And you're like, well, who's telling you this? Why would you not believe them? And they're like, the president. And you're like, oh yeah, right. The president is telling you, and every other Republican that
Yeah.
you know and trust that's in the party that you have supported for 20 years are all telling you that this isn't real. And that is weird, right? So now you're in a really tough spot because you can get confused because legitimate sources are telling you the opposite. So yes, people have, they have culpability, but at the same time, uh, QAnon is putting them in a very rough spot because they're offering them something meaningful to do, something that's fun to do, and something that has the allure of fiction, but the believability of reality. How do
Hmm.
you get, how do you not choose that? And if you say, and people are like, no, but you got to understand it's not real. And then, a senator gets up and says, no, that's false narrative from the lamestream media. You're like, see, I'm right. and
Hmm.
and and President Trump gets on and be like, "Oh yeah, QAnon. Well, I hear that's an amazing movement." And you're like, "Oh, yeah, it is actually." Okay, so it gives you permission to believe what you want to believe.
Have
You
any
can't blame
QAnon?
them too much because it's weird, right? It's like
Yeah.
it's like you have to convince them of a conspiracy theory in order to get them to not believe in the conspiracy theories.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. It's a catch 22 once you're, yeah. Like, so have any conspiracy theories theorized by Q been critical of the president?
I would say yes.
Okay.
Um, yeah, especially now. I think that
Oh,
his
now, yeah.
last speech was, widely criticized by the Q community. Nobody knows where it's going to go,
Yeah.
but
But like prior to January 6th, it seems like
no, he was the hero. He's the
he's the hero.
protagonist. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like it's hard to, like, anyone who might struggle with saying this is propaganda. It's like it's pretty clear that this is propaganda toward a particular, like, when everything you need to do your research on requires you doing research on other people while giving your full allegiance to a particular person. That doesn't really seem like you're doing high quality research or unbiased research. Like that I mean, people, everyone fails, everyone's broken, everyone makes mistakes. Like no politician is above, like, a need to be, or leader in general in any sphere is above the need to be investigated, looked into, just not necessarily in a legal way, but in a sense of,
Yeah.
like, if I'm going to put
People need to be
mine.
skeptical.
Yeah, we should be skeptical to a certain extent, especially of people who have authority, platform, responsibility. Like there's a need to consider how they're using that, how that's impacting other people. And so I find it interesting that when you study Q, it's like, for the most part, they've been very allegiant to Trump as the the truth. I mean, I guess, as like, it's just interesting that that's
The
the
yeah,
company.
the whole I mean, the whole point of this is to push people towards certain propaganda narratives. They always end up at the same tropes, right? They always end up at things that are radicalizing, that are distrusting of the mainstream, that are pro alt right,
Mhm.
regardless of who that is. If Pence is pro, then he's pro. If he's against, then they're gonna hang him. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like this is all about propaganda, and it always leads to the same place. It's against Democrats, Jews, scientists. This is a reboot of anti-Semitic tropes from the medieval times,
Yeah.
right? This
And
is
there's
crazy.
there's even a Georgia, like, isn't there a woman from Georgia who got elected that used a lot of QAnon conspiracy to win her seat? I forget her name. I don't know. I was hearing about, and she said some really anti-Semitic stuff, and attached it to Q, like, and she literally used the words QAnon, like, and I was like, how do we have people that are in this space that, like, it's become more mainstream in the last few years, as even, like, I use in quotes here, credible, like, people that are representatives, whether they're state representatives or even now federal representatives, have bought into this Q
Yes,
stuff. Like,
there are many people in the government who have been elected who are Q proponents,
yeah,
are absolutely associating themselves with Q. Now, how much this is for political gain and how much they believe in it is
yeah,
completely irrelevant. It
hmm,
doesn't matter. If you are promoting it, then you're doing the same amount of damage, whether you personally believe in it or not.
yeah,
That's something for you personally. Um, but I think that you know it got a lot of it's done more probably to bring anti-Semitism into the mainstream than almost anything else
mm,
in recent history. I mean,
mm,
if you look at, and another weird thing that a lot of people don't know about Q is that where Q drops their posts, okay, these message boards are crawling in the most vile, anti-Semitic, misogynist, homophobic, treasonous posts that you have ever seen.
yeah. Like 4chan, right, was the particular, like, large proponent initially, right?
4chan, yeah, and 4chan is like the Garden of Eden compared to where it is now.
Yeah,
I mean, people, you boo 4chan, but 4chan does quite a decent job of policing itself on some level. And by the way, I'm not giving 4chan a pass. I mean, they are a
Yeah.
hotbed of anti-Semitism and all kinds of horrible things. And at the same time, you compare it to where they went to, and it's unbelievable. I mean, you're talking about a group. They moved to 8chan, which was a group that was so they're. Let me back up a little bit. uh, the general premise of the sort of QAnon myth is that there's a huge cabal of magical Satan worshiping pedophiles that are in, are Democrats, they're in Hollywood, they're Jews, etc. This is a blood libel kind of, situation. Um, they're witches, basically. We're gonna
and they
burn the
need
witches.
and they need like and they have like children in caves, and they are
Yeah,
farming children
farming their
for blood.
organs and drinking magical potions out of their blood, and this is
It's
really serious. Okay, and they start to doubt that this isn't fiction, but they, anyway, it goes very, very deep. But so, okay, yeah, so there's a deep state, there's a, this is, a corruption in our government, right? Now, the FBI, okay, has listed QAnon as a homegrown terrorist threat, right? So they're actually a threat. And the posting boards that they are on have been delisted by Google for many, many years as having child pornography and posts that are harmful to children. So they're literally on an organization that does what they are supposed to be fighting. They do it in real life, and they're fighting it in an imaginary capacity.
mm.
It's it's amazing, really. Um, so, and in some ways, this makes it seem almost more credible to them because they can see it just a couple posting boards over. you
Yeah.
know, um, yeah, it's awful. Um,
And
but
them being deplatformed from like Twitter and Facebook and these places kind of only drive them further to feel like, see, they're trying to cover it up, they're trying to stop it, right? Like that's what I hear. At least I hear people who are like, see, that's part of the conspiracy. They're taking us off that platform. That's
Yeah,
part of the
everything's part of the conspiracy, though. That's the thing, like, well, they come up with a conspiracy theory that sounds good. Like, well, why wouldn't the mainstream press cover that? Well, that's the conspiracy. Well, how come, the nobody else talks about it? That's the conspiracy, right? So it's everything.
Mm,
It doesn't. I mean, the point of deplatforming them is because you can't support people taking over the government
yeah,
by violent means. You can't support anti-Semitism. You can't support, uh, insurrection.
yeah.
So they need to be deplatformed, and you need to stop them from proselytizing to new people. But to the people themselves that are in it, yes, I'm sure they feel like it's an attack based on how correct they are,
Okay, so you said at one
but it
point,
clearly is not.
yeah, yeah. So you said at one point he calls them drops, and you've also said uh they drop or things like that. So is the belief within the Q universe that there is one individual that is either inside the government, is a fighter for justice, maybe Edward Snowden, but had never put his name on it. Does that make sense? And let's say he made all these drops without ever putting his name on it and just called himself Q or whatever. What is their belief that there's one person that's dropping all this information in these different places, these, little kind of
Yeah, Q is
nuggets?
one person. There's other people. There's E. Q is for those that don't know, is a security clearance, a level of security clearance. And when
Okay.
the LARP first started, there was like an FBI anon and a Q anon, and something like that. And at that point, I think people probably understood that it was a game, even though it wasn't specifically mentioned. I mean, people on 4chan are pretty knowledgeable actually about LARPing and when people are
And
faking things.
LARPing for people listening is live action role play, correct?
Yes, right.
Okay. All right.
So someone's pretending to be a character. They didn't. I think most of the people, when it started, didn't really think that this was an FBI agent leaking information to the internet. I think
Sure.
most of them are just playing along with it as if it were a game. Like, what would happen? When you write back responses and see what they come up with and stuff like that. But it was very popular. But like for instance, FBI Anon, as I was told, was a straight up kind of fascist anti-Semitism, utopia, right?
Mm.
So, but it was popular. Q took it and kind of actually made it less anti-Semitic than maybe FBI Anon or CIA Anon, some of the other ones. So he or she mainstreamed it a little bit from that. Um, so yeah, so they believe that this is a person, but I think after it got a little more popular, as new people came in, they played it totally straight as if it were real. So I think that maybe the first people were probably pretty convinced that it was some type of role-playing game, but they absolutely tried to enforce the idea that it was real when new people came in, as they brought it to Reddit and to YouTube and things like that.
Okay.
So it is interesting. And in the QAnon universe, yes, Q is a person with Q level clearance who is dropping hints and clues about things that they know in the government or in this secret world, much like any other fictional mystery. Now, as you mentioned Snowden a few times. Snowden dropped everything all at once as quickly as possible,
and gave it to journalists and put his name on it. Like, I mean, that's
yeah.
a little bit.
Same with Chelsea Manning. Same with any of the other real whistleblowers. They have this information. It's super important to get all of it out as much as possible, all the answers, all the data, and to do it like that. Do it fast, right? You don't want to just be like, hey, come look for me. I'm somebody in the government who's giving away secrets.
Yeah.
Maybe you should look at this. Maybe you should look at that. No, if you've got real information, you dump it. You get it to somebody who can distribute it, and you do it as fast as possible, and you get ready for the blowback. Right? Q does not
Yeah.
do this. He operates like a fictional character, who says, why don't you follow the money? Or, have you looked at James? He's acting suspicious.
Yeah.
Who's his boss? Who does he work for? Does he really work for his boss, or does he have another boss? And then you start researching, right? That's what a movie does. Just think how many good movies would be ruined.
Yeah. So there is an actual person who started this movement who had a Twitter account or something, or a 4chan account, or Reddit, whatever, and
Yeah.
was throwing out these like game ideas, almost like this, like, theories and things, or pretending to drop information and just seeing, and then it kind of took on a life of its own. Have we ever found out who that person is? I mean, I would think, like, with our intelligence in America, there would be a way of us knowing who started all this. And I mean, are we also maybe, I mean, I don't know if people, I'm not well enough informed to know if people have theorized who that might be. You had even said there's only like 200 people who know the
Yeah.
depths of this particular type of style of gaming. Could it also be a foreign adversary trying to cause problems to our government? I mean, there's probably a lot of theories about what it could be.
So first of all, obviously it's not my expertise.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, yeah.
However, like for instance, my information about like sort of FBI and on stuff like that, I did not see those posts. I was not
Yeah.
aware of it at that point, but my information comes from other game designers who were. So there are game designers out there who think they have a pretty good idea of who is running Q, or at least who is
Whoa.
involved with it. They know this from hosting records and forensic information on a technical level. Who because the sites keep getting shut down, so new sites have to be created, and you can oftentimes see who is creating those sites and who's involved in it.
Mm-hmm.
So and surprisingly enough, some of these people have been involved in other games and conspiracies and hijacking other games, so it makes sense. But as you go into it, it's very complicated, and it almost feels like a Q mystery, right? Like,
Mm,
oh, this person was in Cicada, and then they took followers away through this method, and then brought them to this game, and then they set up servers here, and they hijacked, this and moved it to there.
mm.
So it's very complicated, but I think they pretty much know. I mean, they feel
So you think
confident.
the
Those
government?
researchers feel confident that they know who it is.
So you probably think the
I'm
government
not.
knows. You probably think the government has a good idea who's behind Q. Then, like, I mean, if I would assume
Yes,
if programmers know, the government probably knows, right?
yes, I think that they do.
Mm.
Now I would. I mean, but it's a guess. That's
Sure.
totally supposition on my part. Um, I feel like though I like their reasoning. I feel like it makes sense. The people that they've identified, these are people that are all hosters of the sites that Q uses. So it would make sense that they were involved, and there's other evidence that shows that they're part of the Q posting group. Now, the thing is, who is behind them, right? Or is
Sure.
anybody behind them? Because the thing for me, and as an outsider and a novice, I mean, at this level, I'm just like everybody else, but you can see that Q absolutely parrots the misinformation campaign of the Russians in the United States. However, are they hijacking that or in other words, copying it to get
Mm-hmm.
to get leverage on a much larger platform, or are they an official? Do they get a notice saying, okay, now we're going to talk about the,
Mm.
we're going to talk about COVID inoculations. That's the big thing. Push that, right?
So the
So we
question
don't
is,
know.
are they
We
being
don't know.
almost like working as a private contractor that's just contracting out that work
Yeah,
of like, here's the propaganda, create a game that makes people play.
yeah. We don't know what we don't know if they're official or if they're riding on the coattails. But
Yeah.
it doesn't make any difference functionally.
It's
Like they're
still
still
creating.
doing the
Yeah.
same thing. It
Yeah.
doesn't matter if someone tells them to do it or whether or not they see that conspiracy theory start and they immediately jump on it.
Mm.
Right? There's still a force multiplier for every bit of chaos that comes down the stream. They're still
Yeah.
going to do that, and they're training people to think in that way. They're training people to look for conspiracies and come up with new conspiracies and get rewarded when they come up with something, that feels fun.
So I want to talk to you about your one of the points of your article. You talk about, I believe I'm pronouncing it right, apophenia. Is that
Yeah.
correct? Okay.
Hmm.
And apophenia is the tendency to perceive a connection or meaningful pattern between unrelated or random things. And you
Right.
share about a game you designed and how people were seeing things in the game that weren't really there, and how you kind of experience that as someone, creating the game, correct? So explain a little bit about that and how Q uses that kind of technique to um have that like pattern be like this meaningful pattern that it creates in
Right. So
pointing toward things.
so when you're designing a game, right, you have a specific goal in mind, you've got a story, but people can, but when you're trying to solve puzzles, especially, or when you have a lot of agency for the players, they can do almost anything, right? It's in reality, so they can run around, they can, in Dungeons and Dragons or anything else, they can do whatever they want. But you're trying to keep them on track, and they're kind of trying to keep on track too. Apophenia comes in where, uh, something appears to be on that track. It appears to be leading them to a solution, but it's not. It's just some random data that they've interpreted um, incorrectly, and that's very common. Apophenia is how we, pattern, how we do pattern recognition and how we arrive at the conclusion eventually. You have to be wrong a few times. For instance, science relies on a lot of apophenia. You're trying to find patterns in a very confusing world, right? So
Yeah,
you
we
say,
did
hey,
we did like an escape room once, and like sometimes you had to get the problem wrong a couple times before you figured out the
Yeah,
riddle and got out of the room. Yeah, yeah.
right. And I'll go over the example that I used in the story, which was I was doing a game in it that led down into a dirt floor basement, very creepy. And I had a very easy clue there that was very easy to find. They just had to look around a little bit and they would see an obvious Scooby-Doo kind of clue. It was very silly. And I didn't really expect any problems with this. It was just to get them down in the basement with a flashlight and have them give that, experience of like, whoa, what's going to be down there, and then laugh when they see the, the clue, right? However, on the basement floor were little scraps of wood from just whatever had been done down there before, and unfortunately, some of the scraps had formed a perfect arrow pointing at a wall, or it looked like an arrow, and they saw the arrow, and they looked at the wall, and they're like, "Okay, that's where the clue is." And if they had just gone a few feet more to the left or the right, they would have seen the real clue, but they couldn't get past this. This looked like just like the kind of clue that they would have expected, something easy, something obvious. So they went to the wall and they couldn't, of course, find a clue, but they found all these tools next to the wall, and they said, the tools are telling us that the clue is inside the wall. And it was made out of rocks. So they thought, we can pry out, one of these rocks is going to be loose and we're going to just pry it out, and that is going to be the clue. And wouldn't that be a cool clue? And I thought to myself, yeah, that would be a great clue. I wish I had done that. But now I'm stuck in reality with a clue over there. And these people are literally about to tear down a wall. So they went from harmless, pleasant clue hunters to, they're going to rip this house apart. And here's the thing, right? The clue made sense. It made total sense. I'm looking at it going, oh my God, that is exactly what I would have thought, right? Had I come down there. So in the game, that was terrible. I had a fail safe, and I had to activate it to get them, back on track and still stay in game. I had an embedded player
Okay.
to kind of.
So I want to talk about that. Do you guys for games, do you guys do like a testing where once you're finished with it, you test it on certain people to make sure that, because I would be like, I don't know how you would find those things out. How would you find those things out other than like people are playing it and you're like, oh wow, that's right. I would have never thought that, but because I think of it in the way of like, if you've been so immersed in a creative project, you don't like, I record music and stuff. So like if I record a song and I've listened to this song 1,000 times by the end, I don't hear that small little thing that maybe you hear, or the thing that and so I love sending it to friends and being like, what are you hearing that I can't hear anymore because I've just listened to it too many times? And I think as a gamer, I almost feel like it's a creative project that it's like, you didn't even see the arrow on the floor because you're so focused on the things that you've been designing for, you're focused on the 1,000 times.
Or it wasn't there. That's the thing. The arrow wasn't there before we started. It had been kicked into that position by everybody walking around on it.
Okay. Wow. Okay. I didn't even think
if
about
we
that.
had seen an arrow on the floor, we would have been like, maybe that would be confusing, but no, we were like hiding the clues and we were walking around and we kicked it into that shape.
Got you. Okay.
And it was probably us. It probably wasn't the crowd, but it could have been the crowd too.
Gotcha.
We don't really know how it appeared, but we do know that things are going to go wrong. We do know that people are going to get off track. So in this case, we had an embedded player to kind of, subtly shift, like, oh, I'm going to go look over behind that rock over there. You know what I mean?
So like before you guys do like a full game though, or like a full, whatever it'd be called, a chapter or whatever, like,
yeah.
do you do like a dry run for like we're going to run someone who hasn't seen this through it before we release it to general population? I'm just more curious this has nothing to do with Q.
Yeah.
This is my curiosity of like how this process goes. Cause we're talking about a real life basement, right? We're not talking about
no,
designed in a game.
Yeah.
Like this is a real basement with real tools in it. And as people had trafficked it, it created some type of arrow on the ground.
Yeah.
So I'm just, and are you watching on cameras, or how are you knowing that people are at this point?
It's different for every type of game, right? So if it's an escape room, definitely you'll run people through it a few times.
Yeah.
See what's too hard, what's too easy, and the puzzle maker will be there with them so on. Um, if it's a large scale alternate reality game, you have to just go with it. You can't test it because you're going to be dealing with 100,000 people.
Yeah.
There's no way to test what they're going to do. In fact, when they made the Beast, they were blown out of the water. I don't remember what the statistics were, but basically they thought they had enough puzzles to last for like a few months, I think, and they were all solved in a week.
Wow.
Or something like that. Don't give on the details
Sure.
are I'm a little fuzzy, but it was really quick. I mean, they burned through that material so fast that it was all just making up stuff after that. And they had other issues about people um like brute force hacking their sites, which cost
Mm.
them hundreds of thousands of dollars in
Ugh.
processing. Yeah, people can't test it, right? So, for instance, one of the best ones I like is the Year Zero one, which was a Trent Reznor ARG for
Oh,
his
Nine Inch
album.
Nails.
Yeah,
Nice.
and so I guess at the end, and I was not there, by the way, so I'm hearing this from interviews and articles. But they had a concert. Trent Reznor did a concert at the end for the people who solved all the puzzles and got to the actual physical space, and they drove them in a bus. And then at the end of the concert, to be dramatic, I guess they had some people storm in, some kind of military, the bad guys, the good guys, I can't remember, but they came in and they ushered everybody, and everybody ran back to the bus, right? Now, the designers were like, someone's going to be a wiseacre and not go. They're going to think this is fiction, and these people aren't going to touch me, right? So I don't have to go back to the bus, right? So what they did was they had some embedded players, um, who were there, who were actors, and that sure enough, that happened. Some people were just like, "Oh yeah, cool. That's cool that they thought to have people come in and pretend to be guards or something like that." Like, yeah, that's pretty awesome. Like, should we go back to this? Nah, it's just fiction. And then the guards came up, came to the actor and just slammed them in the face, knocked them to the ground, you know, attacked them, and suddenly everybody's like, "Oh my god!" And they ran back to the bus. Now this was all planned, but
That could have
if
an adverse effect though, because if like someone in that crowd
they
wants to
could
fight back against
they
those,
could have
like if
fought
it,
back.
yeah,
Yeah. I don't know. I wasn't involved in that one,
yeah, that's
um,
interesting.
but people have all kind, and they were like, if that hadn't worked, if they had figured out we had nothing, like we would have just had to say, could you please
Yeah.
go back to the bus.
So we're
They
back to
really
the
wanted
puppet
to this.
master being
But
really, really, really like not responsible necessarily, but there's a responsibility to really consider a variety of outcomes
yes.
as you're planning a particular chapter level, whatever you want to call it. Like, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you would not expect people to try to answer payphones in a hurricane. You
Yeah.
wouldn't in your wildest dreams. And the thing about it is that because it's fiction, it's like a play, right? So you don't want to break reality and say, "Line, could I have my line?" That's all. You go to a Broadway play, you
Mm,
don't expect actors to come out of character. But
yeah.
sometimes for safety, you have to, but you try to figure it out in game. So in this Year Zero one, they tried to figure out that problem that they anticipated by keeping it in character.
Yeah.
However, they wouldn't sacrifice someone's, you know.
Yeah. No, that's very, very interesting. Now, the way that kind of apophenia of like finding
Right.
the
So
thing
back to
works
Q.
in Q it's pretty sinister though, because it's like
Yeah.
you can just drop anything. I mean, I could probably make a Q drop and someone will make sense out of it, even if I don't have like I could just drop a random lyric to a random 90s song and they'll find some way of connecting it to something that's meaningful, right? Like they could
Right.
it's kind of that like I don't know if you know the theory of like once you start driving like an orange car, you realize, whoa, there's a lot of orange cars on the road. Like this idea of
Yeah,
like if you
yeah, yeah.
search for it, you're gonna
Yeah.
find it.
Right.
Like so talk a
That's
little bit about
literally
that.
true. So what Q does is the opposite of what a real game does. A real game has puzzles. In my puzzle, I wanted people to find the clue. Um, Now Q would work just the opposite way, right? So you got people in a basement and they're looking for a clue, and Q would say, "Hey, look at those scraps of wood on the floor. don't they look like an arrow? Like, oh yeah, they do look like an arrow. It'd be like, and why would someone create an arrow pointing to a wall? There must be something there, right? And people say, yeah, there must be. Why would you do that otherwise? And then look at these tools, right? So pretty soon Q would have them tearing down the wall, right? That's what Q's all about.
Yeah.
Q doesn't have a because Q doesn't have a puzzle. Q doesn't have any solutions to reach. So it only is going to the feeling of like apophenia. It's going for whatever story feels the best.
Mhm.
In the game, like I said, if I could have hidden something behind that wall, I'd probably have let him pry out a rock or two. It's just,
Yeah.
to do that. But there wasn't anything there.
Yeah.
Q doesn't care that there's not anything there. They're wrong over and over and over again, right? That's
Yeah.
not the point. And guess what? There'll be something there. There maybe another rock or something like that. It'd be like, oh, did you notice that when we pulled that rock out, that it had these markings on it? It was scratched in this specific way, or this dirt is the kind of dirt used to fill in whatever. I mean, I don't know. It
From
would
a
just be an endless chain of apophenia.
Yeah, from a puppet master perspective, do you think there's Q drops that have kind of taken a left turn that the puppet master wasn't expecting, and then the puppet master just ran with it?
Absolutely.
Do you think
I
that's?
think
I was gonna say, do you think that's probably a pretty regular like? I'm just gonna throw them something, and whatever comes of it, whatever the
yeah.
the chat board starts saying, I
I mean,
can
I think
work
they're
with that.
I think the drops are fairly directed. They
Okay.
they might be something like, "Hey, look at Epstein.
Mm,
Who else who ran the jet company or whose island was next to Epstein's island? Could they and they already know that information, right? Why would they
hmm
not know that information? So maybe it's somebody that they wanted to include in their LARP, right?
hmm
Or they wanted to point the finger at that or who like a lot of the big thing is like whose son was this or that, you know what I mean? Like,
hmm
so oh my God, why is this military intelligence guy's son a rock star in Hollywood? Or throwing the hand horns at a concert. It's all they know the rough things of what they're pointing to, but at the same time, I think they heartily encourage people to, come up with their own, solutions. Like for instance, a lot of people will talk about the sort of JFK Jr. being alive or, whatever that
Mm.
conspiracy theory was, but Q didn't actually come up with that. That was the community that came up with that.
I haven't heard that. Tell me about that. So
I don't really know that. I don't really know that much about it, honestly. But there were several. There was several conspiracies that Kennedy was alive,
huh?
that he was going to be supporting Trump and or running as his vice president or something like that. You know,
Oh wow.
but there's all kinds of conspiracy theories out there. There's a conspiracy. There's conspiracy theories that we're involved in a war with China, like a
Yeah.
land war in the United States with China. That we're actually troops in China
Oh wow.
here in the U.S. There are conspiracy theories that Beyonce is part of the Illuminati, and she's
Yeah.
the queen of the Illuminati.
And Jay-Z's the king, you
Yeah,
know?
that's right. Yeah, Jay-Z's the king. And
Oh
you're
my
like, yeah,
gosh.
well, guess what? Jay-Z is interested in the Illuminati, right? So
Yeah.
it's like it feeds on what people are already doing, right? It's pointing to things where you have to be like, yeah, well, that is weird. I mean, yeah, Epstein existed. He was real, and he's a rapist in Hollywood, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So you're like, well, if there could be one, why not other ones, right? So
Yeah. So it kind of it's a game marketing propaganda and controversy eh, and at the same time it then crosses over into reality, and that's what we saw. Like, I've watched the videos of the Capitol, many of them, actually one that just dropped a couple days ago of the New Yorker, that was really disturbing on some of the levels of it. But I'm a pastor, and man, the amount of like religious even uh stuff in, I don't know how much Q is responsible for that, but just some of the people who have fallen prey to this propaganda are also people who would consider themselves churchgoers, followers of Jesus, maybe like religious people. And it's like, wow, the lack of discernment in this to be able to violently storm a Capitol and feel like there's a certain part of me that has a lot of empathy and compassion for these people, but then because like they're kind of maybe, I don't know, being fooled. And also there's something you point out in your article too of like community. Like people are finding community here. They'll post something after a drop that maybe as a puzzle they solved within the drop, and then that will get all kinds of affirmation from the community. And now it's like
Yeah.
I have this dopamine rush of like I have friends, like this piece of me that needs validation maybe or needs connection. And then you throw a global pandemic on that where people aren't connecting in normal ways, they're connecting more so in virtual ways. And I don't know. It's just, it's interesting to see how much propaganda was there during the storming of the Capitol. And like this tension I have as someone who wants to believe in the best in humanity of like grace for these people who are kind of under a spell of sorts that maybe don't know, almost like, I mean, almost like a mental health issue is happening in this space. Like I want to have empathy and
Yes.
understanding for it, but then also a sense of like, come on, you got to know better. Like there's like this double-edged sword in my mind of like seeing these people. How do you process that as someone who's responsible for placing people in those alternate realities? Um, like what are your thoughts on that? Do you kind of feel
Oh,
that
I
same
feel the
tension?
same way. I mean,
Okay.
I feel really mixed about it. I mean, I have a lot of, like I don't think people in QAnon are stupid. I don't think that they're evil. Um, and yet at the same time, they have culpability for their actions, just like everybody else in the world.
Mm,
You know what I'm saying? If you are doing, if like I get that you can be confused, and I get that you can be, manipulated. Okay, but at the same time, if your story is hurting other people, literally, if you're posting anti-Semitic rants, if you are, um, storming the Capitol in insurrection, let's say,
yeah.
you know, you're still responsible, right? It's unfortunate that you were brought that way. It's like, putting stumbling blocks in front of the blind, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, you were vulnerable and someone took advantage of you, and at the same time, you're still doing it. You're still doing it. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm really mixed. I feel like the people who are setting this up are terrible people. Honestly, I mean,
Yeah.
they're literally driving a nation insane,
Mm,
and I think that's their goal.
mm,
So I have no compassion for them,
mm,
and I think that the people that are involved, um, especially the ones that are committing acts of violence and so on, they're putting their own feelings ahead of the safety of their fellow citizens,
mm.
right? They are hurting other people to make themselves feel good. And I think that's the same with any kind of, bigotry or anti-Semitism or homophobia. When it makes you feel good about yourselves to think, oh, I'm superior to these people, or oh, my problems are not my problems, they're problems because of somebody else, and I just gotta get rid of them. When
Mm,
you do that sort of thing, yes, you found a way to make yourself feel good at the expense of somebody else.
hmm.
Okay, and that's where your culpability comes in. I'm sorry, it pleasure isn't an excuse, right? And
Hmm.
yet at the same time it's so hard not to. Like,
Yeah.
you know what I'm saying? It's like, there's an addictive quality, so it's like, yeah, you shouldn't be smoking, you know and it is your choice and you are responsible for it, but at the same time, come on, let's not advertise to these kids and get
Yeah.
them hooked. Right? There's
Yeah.
culpability, but there's also, they're also being preyed upon at the same time. I feel really, really conflicted about it.
So, as a puppet master who's created these types of like games where people get immersed in them, how do you think we should respond as people who have relationships with somebody who might be part of QAnon, who might follow that kind of thing? Like, what's a way that almost using some of the same techniques we might be able to pull them out of it, or at least with the knowledge of the techniques that they're being kind of cast into this spell almost of controversy and propaganda? Like, what's your best advice for the mom who's worried about her son, or the nephew who's worried about his uncle, or the
Yeah.
family member or friend that they're like, I just see this person getting so immersed in this world of QAnon and shadow government and all of this, and it's all they want to talk about, and ultimately that relationship's just starting to drift. How how can we have healthy conversations that might actually have a meaningful chance of pulling them out of that alternate reality?
I mean, that's a great question, and it's the question, right? I think that one, it's super hard as long as we're in this media, uh, disinformation war.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's hard when they're getting so much messaging from outside that they're right.
Mm-hmm.
You're always going to be competing against that. But that being said, for instance, my son came to me one day and he had seen, he was very upset about some viral video that he saw on TikTok that was one of these QAnon-ish,
Mm.
conspiracy theories. And we had to, sit down and talk about it. So one, they're coming for you. You got to know that they're out there and that they're going to be looking
So
for your kids.
there's a
You got to be
proactive
pro.
element of
Yeah,
parents. You should be paying attention to this stuff,
absolutely. I
keeping
think
your
that's,
kids out of it.
that's the first line of defense, as it is for any illness or anything, is education, awareness that people that you like and that are going to be talking about this stuff in a way that makes it seem very benign.
Mm.
I think understanding the techniques will help you avoid this. It will also help you to understand some things about people who are in QAnon, which is one, they don't believe everything. It's not like just because you self-identify as Q, you believe everything that Q says, or that you
Mm.
believe all the conspiracy theories that are out there. You are picking and choosing. You're like, well, definitely this one, but yeah, maybe this, maybe that, or whatever. And that's why people are like, oh, but Q is wrong again. Well, they probably didn't believe that one in the first place. You know what I'm saying?
Mm.
So it's not like they're stupid in the sense of like, oh, I thought they said it was going to happen, it didn't happen, and now I'm, whatever. They probably didn't really care about that one that much. You know what I'm saying?
Mm.
So there is doubt inside the Q thing. If you attack them, if you have an argument, you just start playing a role and fighting back. Like you find yourself defending something that maybe you don't even care about that much in the first place.
Yeah.
Okay, so don't engage head on in a combative way and try to prove that they're wrong, because you can't dispel a doubt anyway. There's no way to
Mm.
prove that somebody isn't in a cult, right?
Yeah.
How can you do that? You can't, because they're keeping it a secret. So why would you ever know, right? So instead of hitting it head on like that, you can't. You have to just understand that probably they're not 100% convinced of it either, you know.
Mm. Isn't
So
this kind of like Occam's razor in the sense of like whatever is like the most explainable? There's just certain things that are when I think of like of conspiracy theories in general, it's like I'm not gonna lie, there was a time where I watched Loose Change. I don't know if you remember that particular documentary where it was about the 9/11 conspiracy of Building 7 and some other things, and there was a part of me that was like, wow, that's actually some interesting information there. But then over time, it was like, but like, I have to come back to like, that would be so hard to keep all of that under wraps. Like I just come back to like, probably the most reasonable explanation is the explanation that is the most likely. Like, do you think there's any reasoning like that with somebody? Like, I want to believe there is, but I don't know. I mean, because then you get into the arguing of the, well, I don't believe that, but I believe this, and like this. I don't know. I'm at a
yeah,
loss for how to engage these people myself, and that's what
I
I was
I think
hoping.
the okay, so I think the first thing is that a lot of like we were talking about right in the beginning of the show, a
Yeah.
lot of this gaming and fiction in general is an internal process, right?
Mm,
So,
yeah.
and oftentimes it's there to fulfill a need that's not being met, or to create something that hasn't been created. So, in other words, I think people are really, really isolated right now. I think they
Mm,
need community. I think they need genuine experience. I think they need, you know, things to do that are meaningful to them and to the world around them. So the first thing to pull someone away from gaming in general, when you can't just say, all right, you've had enough gaming, turn it off, right? Is to include them.
like
I
significant human connection. Like,
Yes,
yeah,
yes.
yeah.
Keep
Gotcha.
them in a community of people with a lot of truth, a lot of compassion, a lot of love. I'm telling you, there are very few people I think who would not want to just go to a party or go hang out and get a coffee instead of haunting cue boards all night, right?
Yeah.
If you have yeah, I mean, it's a game, which means that it's taking the place of something. It
Mm,
might be taking the place of something else. So the first thing I would say is make sure you understand it and can be proactive about it. The second thing I would say is if you do know people, keep them involved. Don't let them slip away. Keep them emotionally and even physically close if you can.
wow.
I mean, people need connection. I think
Yeah.
isolation is a huge problem in the United States right now, and I think that's how some of this is spreading because you can project anything you want onto somebody you don't know or to a group that you don't know. And Q
Mm,
picks these people that are hard for most people to access, like billionaires and high-ranking Democrats. Um, so that's the second thing.
mm,
In terms of how to deprogram someone that's already really deep in that, that I don't know. There are experts in deprogramming, and a lot of
mm,
times what they will say is to talk about other uh, other systems of cult indoctrinations that are not related to the one that they're in, so they don't get defensive.
mm.
So you can talk about other. Now I don't know any other programs,
Sure.
but you can talk about maybe alternate reality games, right? I don't
Sure.
know. Maybe they could even play some fictional ones and see the similarities. I don't
Mm.
I don't know.
That's
Is
a good
that
idea.
is that a terrible idea or is that a good idea? I mean, will they get hooked into those? But certainly they will immediately start to be like, oh, wait a minute. This looks really familiar.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Interesting. So I think QAnon is on the fast track to, I mean, I know they're already on, like, I think the FBI listed them even before 2020 as like a a
Domestic
significant
threat.
a
Yeah.
domestic threat. Yeah, domestic threat, and like a significant interest of the FBI to monitor and watch. So and I'm sure after the 6th, they're going to be considered a domestic terrorist organization of some sort. I don't know if they can call them an organization. I mean, I guess what I'm saying is it's only ramping up to be um, associated with that being a domestic threat. Where do you see this going? I mean, I think no one probably saw. I mean, it grew in 2020, I think, because of two factors. One, a global pandemic forcing people out of connection with one another and into homes where they had nothing better to do than scroll chat boards. Does that make sense? Like if they were already doing
Yeah.
that in the 30 minutes a day they had to themselves where they didn't have other things to do, now they might be doing it 5 hours a day or more, right? So that was a factor. I think the other factor is we had an election. Obviously, that's going to ramp up
Yeah.
interest in some of this propaganda. Where do you see this going now? Like if you were to think a year ahead in this, we'll just say quote game, where's I mean, and not that I'm holding you to that because I don't think you have any
Uh,
way of knowing, but I guess what I'm saying is like when you're creating a game, there's an end game. There's an end to the game. There's a final chapter. There's a desired goal or end, right? It doesn't really seem like Q has, or at least that we're aware of has. I mean, how yeah, I'm just curious what you see, how you see this ending
Okay,
or
well, I
continuing
think
or.
that Q is confusing because Q is confused. Like, I don't think the
Mm,
game is that well organized, like as a
yeah.
game designer, right? I think there's a lot of improv going on, a lot of like, let's try this, it pivots, it goes back and forth, it tries things. I think it's also I think even the Q game is being influenced by other forces. Anyone can go
Mm,
in there and start, spreading a rumor, right? So I don't even know who the main influencers are right now. I think
mm,
it's just become like like a town hall for conspiracy theories at this point. I
yeah.
don't even know if the people running it are running it all the way. You
Mm,
know, so who knows what's going to happen? I think it's really just being run by the seat of its pants in
mm.
some way. Um,
Does that give you encouragement to think it might be coming to an end because of the
no,
disorganization?
No, because I don't think that it coming to an end is really the end. For instance, Q came about from other things. So for instance, Alex Jones's InfoWars, right,
Mm,
was talking about magical pedophilic goblins long before Q was, and Q
mm,
picked up on that, right? And started going with it, and Alex Jones gave him a nod, and you know what I mean. Alex Jones was the guy that was talking to the president before, and then he kind of flamed out, and Q kind of took over. And if Q flames out, there'll be something else. You know what I'm
mm.
saying? So I don't. It, you know what I mean? It's
It's
not.
it's it's just interesting because like I think of it that way too, that like the baton's going to get handed off to some other, thing, whatever that is. Like, and I'm not to make it too political, even though it is, but like there was the Tea Party, which was like,
Yeah.
you're more kind of like right wing, like really right wing Republicans, right? And like you've always kind of had these iterations and the baton handed off. But like when I think of myself in high school and even in college, I'm like, I don't ever remember there being this like propaganda wing. And maybe I was just ignorant and wasn't aware of it, but like to the extent that is Alex Jones
Oh,
and this
yeah.
particular organ, like now
No, this is
Q,
new.
this is
This is
new.
new.
Like this is
Yeah.
a new level. The baton's been handed off and they've ran the ball pretty far down the field. Like it's a whole different stadium that we're in now. Like,
Yeah, I think it's insane. I mean, I think that talk about Occam's razor, right? I think
yeah.
when people are looking around and being like, "What the hell is going on?" Right? They're thinking this, the writers of 2020 just went off the rails. This is nuts. It's like,
Yeah.
yes, that is literally what happened. This is being scripted. This is designed to drive us crazy. There's no point
Mm,
in being like, how can Trump do this? Or how can so and so do this? Or why are people acting like this? They're not. They're
mm,
not. It's all fiction. I feel like we're living in a scripted reality show, right?
mm.
You know what I mean? Like, yes, okay,
Yeah.
it's the real world, but it's also semi scripted as well.
It's like
We
the Truman
literally
Show.
have
We're in the Truman Show. Did you watch that? Did you watch that movie?
I did watch the Truman
Yeah,
Show. Yes,
yeah,
yes, and that was scripted for everybody to have a really good
yeah.
experience. This is scripted to drive
Opposite.
us
Yeah,
crazy.
yeah,
We literally have a reality show guy like as the president. You know what I mean? Like, and so I don't know. And again, this could be apophenia too. I could just be uh you know blue skying myself crazy right now. Thinking that's happening, but come on,
yeah.
this wasn't going on. We have a lot of records from our own government, from the FBI, from the CIA, from security commissions saying, yes, the Russians were involved. They infiltrated groups on both sides. It's not the left, it's not the right.
Mhm,
Um, all A lot of the stories that you saw that seemed crazy were fictional, right?
mhm,
So that's a fact. That's not a conspiracy theory. You can go in the records and you can look at it and you can see the sites and you can download and remember, oh, I remember that meme. Right. That was published by this arm of the Russian government, right?
mhm,
So I think that this crazy world that we're living in is not so real anymore. And I think that, the internet was a very naive place. As much as people liked to pretend that the internet was, a deep dark cesspool, actually it was pretty naive, and it didn't have any protections from this scale of propaganda that would be dumped into it. You know,
Mm,
you just didn't. I mean, at first they didn't even know what was happening, but by 2016 we all knew. We had the reports even before the election. We knew that the Russians were meddling, as well as many other countries. China was also meddling, and so we knew. But what we're leaving it to the hands of Facebook and Twitter. I mean,
yeah.
this is not the group that should be responsible for this. I mean, even if they could do it, I mean, they're deleting 10,000 accounts a day.
Yeah.
I mean, it's crazy. Um, Even if they could do it, they shouldn't be the ones responsible for doing it. I don't know what our response here is, but yeah, I think that because we're so isolated and because social media has become so popular and because it's so unguarded, one way I kind of look at fiction is like it's a reflection. Like you're looking out, but you're really
Mm,
looking in. Okay, when you go to
mm,
see a movie, you're not really caring about the actors and stuff. You're caring about how you feel, right?
mm,
Um, but but if you could control the reflection, right, then you can make the world feel like whatever you want it to. And I feel like that's what's happening right now. I feel like
mm.
we're living in a fictional world online, and it's distorting our perception of reality. I'll give you a small example, but um, you know, uh, my wife was in the Democratic Party, and she was getting very upset by all these kind of Bernie Bros and people acting in a certain way towards her. And she's like, "Oh, I'm going to go to this conference, and it's going to be really awful because I'm going to have to do that." None of those people were there in real life, right? Or
Mm.
they weren't there. It was an illusion, right? Everybody was civil, everybody was polite, they all worked together, um, and that's reality.
Mm.
It's not. The internet is not reality. The map does not equal the territory.
Yeah.
So
Well, and that's
and it
true.
worked on me. It worked on me. I
Yeah.
was irate about certain people and things, and then I met them, and I was like, oh, wait a minute, what the heck happened?
Yeah. And that's true in my experience too. People will say things behind a keyboard that they won't say to your face. Like people are far more civil when you're in their presence. Typically, I'm not going to say that of everyone, but I'm saying typically speaking, even people who have, hot takes on the internet, like you get into a room with a person and there's a shared humanity that's definitely missing right now. I mean, look, talking past people is something that's happened since humans have existed. So I'm not saying that isn't a problem that the internet has, but and demeaning people and all that, that's always existed. Um, but I do think there's something about being in a room with someone where the level of respect and concern for that person, um, for most people is part of the equation before, you open your mouth. Whereas before I type on the keyboard, I don't I don't see that person as human. I see that person as, I don't know, a profile picture, which is just different.
Yeah,
Like it's different. Like and
everything you're saying is true. I mean, I agree anyway with everything you're saying.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
true. But what I'm also saying is that many of those people don't exist at all.
They're just bots.
they're
They're
just
just bots.
they're just bots. They're not even real. I can populate your feed with 1,000 people with a click of a button.
Wow.
You
Yeah, I
can
mean,
you can literally be talking to yourself, is what I'm saying.
so you can
And
make
all
it.
those bots can be chatting with you, and they can be pointing you to news stories that back up what they're saying. And this could be an absolute echo chamber that you can't escape. I think we've got a huge problem.
So I could look at someone else and what they're posting and see, oh my gosh, they've got 2,000 likes on this and all kinds of comments. So it must be real, but it's just
No,
bots. It's
yeah,
just
it's
bots.
bots talking, it's bots commenting, and a lot of those bots are controlled by humans sometimes. So yes, they can reply to you and you can have a conversation. But when you limit your conversations to 100 characters, it doesn't take a lot.
Yeah.
you know, to throw an animated GIF back at you and make you angry, at that whole group.
Yeah, and I do think it's hard to give I have I have the same double-edged sword kind of feeling toward like things like Twitter. It's like, cool, Jack Dorsey took Trump off Twitter so he can't continue to spread misinformation, but like you don't get really any, praise from me from the standpoint of like he's been violating your terms of, service since day one. Like I would be kicked off in 2 seconds if I did half the things he did. Like I mean, it's that double-edged sword though of like, but he's also the president of the United States. So like and that's where it's like, at what point do we say, is it Twitter's job to police this? And is it Facebook's job to police it? And then like I was listening to what's the new platform, Parlor or whatever, like, and I was listening to the CEO of that organization talk, and look, I don't have any empathy for them, or I don't have an opinion about them, but I mean, she makes a good point. How can we monitor all of this traffic? Like there's so much. It's like they have a responsibility to monitor it. I believe that. But then it's like, but how? Like, how does that actually work when you have millions of users, so many millions of posts per minute, or whatever it might be? Like, and I'm not saying that that's how popular Parler is. I'm just saying there is a certain amount of me that's like, yeah, that would be hard to police that. Like, there's a factor in all of this that's like, is Q just going to be with us forever in new iterations on the internet? Because there's really no way of policing this. There's no way of stopping something like this, because I don't know. It's genie's out of the bottle, maybe you might say, right? I don't know. I mean, I'm not saying that's the case. I want to believe and hope that there's possibility, but do you see this kind of, you know, role-playing gaming mechanism ever being uprooted now that it's kind of taken roots?
Um, well, I think everything's always changing.
Yeah.
So I think there's same with any type of security. Someone breaches it and you're like, oh, that's it, it's done. Like, there's nothing we can do,
Mm.
to stop this. And then someone's like, oh, but we could do this. I mean, the whole system changes. I don't think we'll be posting on posting boards,
Mm.
forever either, right?
Yeah.
I think that's on its way out. Um, so then they're going to have to create, instead of bots, they're going to have to create virtual reality avatars that can walk around and move and talk to you. I don't know. Can they? And they're going to be like, oh, well, that's too hard. But then soon that will be easy. But then soon we'll be doing something else. It's a
Yeah.
leapfrog game. But I think I don't even see us trying, to be perfectly honest. I mean, I think that's the biggest problem I have.
Mm.
I don't really see anybody taking this as seriously as I think we should. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's way out of my area, but
What would someone taking it seriously look like? I'm just curious. Like,
I
what do
mean,
you think that would look like?
I think that you know a lot of these companies are existing openly. I
Mm-hmm.
don't think they should be. I don't think
Mm.
there should be a Stop the Steal organization that's being run by marketing companies in the United States, gathering together groups of insurgents to storm the Capitol. I mean,
Mm.
am I wrong about that? Maybe, I don't know, but but I don't think that there should be millions of fake news articles around. I mean, I think there needs to be. I don't know. I wish I did. I wish I was at this point, suddenly, first time in my life, I wish I was a psyops expert.
Yeah.
I'm a game developer, right? So I could see the tech. I'm like, okay, they're using these techniques. That's really as far as my expertise goes. I have a lot of experience on the internet. I've been there before the World Wide
Mhm.
Web, so I'm an old guy. So I've definitely, been there before 4chan, before Twitter, and I've seen similar problems like this happen. For instance, in Usenet, right? There was a bulletin board system called Usenet where everybody could post anything they wanted to, and it was very fun and wonderful until
Mhm.
one day somebody realized, hey, I can post to every single news group I want with my ad. And there was
Mm.
no blocking or filtering. And suddenly they became like instantly unusable. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um, and in order to use them, people had to constantly be monitoring them and coming up with programs to do it. And it was the same kind of thing, but it basically, to my mind, kind of killed it for me. Now we're having the same problem with social media. They've gotten to the point where AI can simulate a human being, so you can make infinite amounts of them. Infinite.
Mm.
This is the
Yeah.
problem. So yeah, I think that oh god, there's so many
There's a lot of
vectors
possible
to this. There's
solutions.
so
Yeah.
many vectors to this. Like, I think that obviously the tech companies were not policing it. I think at first maybe they didn't know about it, but I also think they completely underfunded their own staff in dealing with this problem.
They
There's
didn't take
lots
it
of leak.
seriously, and
They
they
didn't
probably
take it
got a
seriously
lot of money
or
for it. That would
care.
be my guess too. Like I'm guessing that was just running traffic up and ads up for them. Like the bots and such were creating more content, more. I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know how that works. I mean, I would
there's some
assume.
great whistleblowing about that you can read about, Facebook's internal process and how they were trying to stop it, but like half-heartedly, because it was driving traffic and it was hard to do, and it was changing other countries' politics, but they didn't really
Mm,
have to, so they kind of did it. So one, I think they need to take it seriously, because it's literally going to destroy their business model. It's going to
mm,
destroy the whole thing. People are leaving social media. They're going to have to stay sane.
mm,
And they need to get on this right away. People don't want it.
yeah.
Um, the other thing is, I think that national security. It's a national security issue. I think
Yeah.
that you know we should not be. I mean, it's these people are doing illegal things. They should be stopped.
Mm,
People who do illegal stuff on the internet should be stopped. I don't know why it's continuing, but you know
yeah.
it is.
No.
So I think it needs to be, and I think that people need to be aware personally, and that's maybe the. I mean, I remember when I got taken before the 2016 election, I was like, oh wow, wow. I was arguing with people that didn't exist for like 6 months, and after the election, a lot of them just disappeared.
Wow.
You know what I mean? And all the articles came out like like a month before, and I had seen, I'm pretty far on the left, and I had seen a lot of my friends even further to the left get get totally move away from Hillary Clinton and move away from that. So there was a push on the left to move, to get people upset with the centrists, uh,
Hmm.
Democrats, to get them not to vote, and it was very, very successful. So it wasn't just on the right. It's not a
Yeah.
right or left thing. We're all susceptible to this propaganda, just like we're susceptible to advertising and everything
Mm,
else. And I think that our on the left, I can say I think our left bias of us being intelligent really works against us, because
sure.
um, uh, it works. It works on
So
everybody.
there's nothing like a Q on the left side though, right? Like I mean, I from what I can understand about Q, and I'm not saying liberals aren't part of Q. I guess I'm saying it seems like most of what Q's pushing is a pretty conservative propaganda. I mean, at least from what I've seen,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
that's
No,
what
no.
I've seen together. There is no like Q alternative on the left, right? Or anything similar to that you're aware of?
No, there's no game like structure, but there is
Sure.
definitely a lot of propaganda.
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah, yeah. Yep. No, I agree.
And radicalizing propaganda
Hmm.
and pushes towards all kinds of the same issues, towards strife and violence and
Yeah.
extremism and all that stuff. Um, and there was a lot of evidence that the Russians were using um, both sides. They really
Yeah.
wanted to just create strife. I think that's important, that we don't let that happen, that we keep being civil and reaching across the aisle and talking to each other. And that doesn't mean necessarily compromising on our ideals, but treating other people as people, and not
100%.
as just symbols for what we're angry at, right?
Yeah.
Because not projecting our own things onto them. So I don't know. I'm talking way outside of my area of
No,
expertise.
you're
But
not at all. These are all great
uh,
things. I think importing humanity into life in a way of considering others and their perspectives. So often when I disagree with somebody about policy or such, and I actually sit down and have a conversation about why they believe what they believe, there's usually some story element behind that. Getting back to story, like there's usually some either story they've told themselves or thing that they've experienced in life that brings them to that conclusion. And you begin to be able to understand why they might advocate for that particular thing, or you begin to inform them of a different story that has a different outcome. And from that, you're able to, compromise or find some type of either middle ground or solution, or even just a change in perspective for both parties. And I think that's something that's so necessary right now. And who knows, hopefully soon that will come about in our world.
yeah, I feel like just having a polite conversation with someone with different ideas is now an accomplishment, something to seek out and to do, just simply to do it as an accomplishment.
For sure. So Reed, if anyone wants to find out more about you or get connected with you, what are some ways that you would encourage them to get connected with you?
Well, they can follow me on my Twitter account, which is SOI, and they can reach out to me at curiouser-institute.com.
Okay.
And we're sort of redoing the site, but it's still up and functioning. The emails work, so
yeah. And make sure to read the Medium article that's in the link will be in the description of this podcast, and I'll also link your Twitter and your website in there as well for people who want to follow along. Reed, thank you so much for being on Beyond Boundaries and for sharing your wisdom.
This is great. I really was looking forward to this opportunity, and it was a great conversation. And just for your listeners, a lot of what I said is my own opinion, and I could be wrong. And I think we all need to be open to that idea of being wrong and listening to other people, and sharing our opinions in a civil way. So thank you so much for hosting this.
Yeah, thanks, Reed. Another episode down. I want to thank Reed for being open and sharing from his experience. You can learn more about Reed at the Curiouser Institute. The link is in the description if you want to find out more there, or read the Medium article that we referenced, or you can follow him on Twitter. So please make sure to check those platforms out. Again, I'm incredibly thankful to Reed for giving us so much of his time today. It was also great to have you with me today on Beyond Boundaries, and I'm thankful for your time too. If you want to learn more about me or find the show notes for this episode, you can find out more at pastorjustindouglas.com. You can interact there with feedback, comments, and questions, and I'm always available on Instagram at Pastor Justin Douglas. Please consider subscribing, rating, reviewing, and sharing. It really does make a difference. And as I said earlier, my hope is to release roughly 2 podcasts a month, and that requires a little bit of assistance on Patreon to make that possible. So if you're able to support, there's a link in the description for Patreon as well. May you go and live a life that is beyond boundaries, giving others love, exploring new ideas, and championing belonging.